We are here at a crucial point in our country's journey toward inclusion. The conversation around accessibility is changing every day, and businesses are increasingly recognizing the strategic advantages of making their services and products accessible to all. But we still have work to do. So why aren't more businesses taking full advantage of these opportunities? Why do we still see resistance in some places? In many cases, the hesitation comes from lack of understanding. It's not about spending vast amounts of money. We're talking about pennies on the dollar in some cases. It's about making small, intentional changes that yield huge returns in loyalty, customer base, and brand reputation. When businesses take accessibility seriously, they see tangible benefits that go beyond meeting the letter of the law. We all know that small changes can have big impact, whether it's improving website navigation, adjusting signage, or providing more inclusive customer service. The steps you take today create a more welcoming environment for everyone and a more sustainable business model. Let's take this opportunity to lead by example, to continue to innovate, and to embrace accessibility as a way to enhance our businesses, support our communities, and build a stronger, more inclusive future. Thank you, and let's keep moving forward together. Let me introduce the remarkable leaders who are here today. Michael Hinkson, Chief Vision Officer at Accessibility, a New York Times best-selling author, a 9/11 survivor, whose work pushes us to look beyond physical spaces and consider how attitudes and perceptions shape true inclusion. Joshua Klipp, he's a CASP inspector, an attorney, an amazing musician, and an advocate who demonstrates how small businesses, often working with limited resources, can still lead by example in creating accessible and inclusive spaces. Eli Gillardin, from the Office on Disability and Accessibility, formerly known as the Mayor's Office on Disability, who brings decades of experience helping businesses navigate the practical and legal aspects of accessibility. Eli was previously the CEO at CIL, Center for Independent Living, of Marin for 17 years, where he led the organization in providing critical support and advocacy for people with disabilities in Marin County. Andre Lamont Wilson, Small Business Development Center Supervisor at Ability Now in the Bay Area, in the East Bay. He's been there for 35 years. He leads the Cornerstone Micro Enterprise Program and the Ability Right Now Writing Program. He's an artist and a UCLA graduate. Andre won the 2022 Newfound Prose Prize and received a certificate of recognition from the California State Legislature in 2012 for his work with individuals with disabilities. And last but certainly not least, our keynote speaker, Kiran Kaja, Principal Product Manager and Global Accessibility Leader at Amazon, ensures that accessibility is integrated into products like Alexa, Fire TV, and Prime Video. Previously, Kiran led accessibility efforts at SAP, Adobe, Google, and Instagram. An advocate for accessible technology, he's traveled to 52 countries, championing inclusivity worldwide. Now we're going to proceed with our panel discussion led by Andre Lamont Wilson. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you all for coming out today. My first question is for Michael. You were on the 78th floor of the World Trade Center in 2001 when it was struck by the first plane. As a blind person and a 9/11 survivor, can you share a personal experience that illustrates why accessibility is a business necessity and not just a compliance checkbox?
Sure, and thank you very much, Andre. This is a little bit of an esoteric example, but I'm going to use it anyway. Until the early 1980s, no blind person or other person with a disability was able to obtain, purchase, or have life insurance. the insurance companies said that we were too high of a risk and they would have to charge us too much to be able to provide us with insurance. Insurance companies base all of the things that they do on mathematical models, actuarial statistics, evidentiary data. They have absolute facts of everything that they cite to make any decision that they make. It was discovered, and I don't have time to go into all the details of how that happened. If anybody wants to hear it, we can talk about it later. But it was discovered that in reality, the insurance industry had absolutely not one single solitary mathematical model, precept, concept, or piece of information to demonstrate that people who were blind or people who had other disabilities were, in fact, people who had a higher mortality rate than anyone else. That began a movement. I chaired the Massachusetts effort for that movement at the time to get states to pass legislation to say that insurance companies could not do what they were doing, which was literally discriminating against people who had disabilities. What happened as a result of all of that was that in reality, every state in the union passed a law that said that no insurance company could discriminate or not provide life insurance to people who were blind or had other disabilities unless they could demonstrate through mathematical models, actuarial statistics, or evidentiary data that we were a higher risk. It is now 2025, and no evidence has yet been produced. It was all based on prejudice. It was all based on nothing except people's misconceptions about disabilities. And the fact of the matter is that that is something that we can't tolerate as people who are affected by this. So it was a personal experience, and I do have life insurance today because of it, as do many people.
Thank you, Michael. My next question is for Eli. Yeah, from your perspective at the Office on Disability and Accessibility, what are the biggest misconceptions small businesses have about accessibility?
Yeah, great question and great to be here. Eli Gilardin, and just as a brief visual description, I'm a middle-aged Caucasian male, little person, wearing a, I guess, mostly black suit, and I have a ponytail. So, you know, I think, and we've heard and touched on this in some of the opening comments, but accessibility is perceived often as being expensive, hard to reach, complicated, litigious, scary. And what I would like to think about accessibility really being is universal design and access, and how can we make practical, simple adjustments. Yes, we need to make sure you have the right width of a door and ramp to get in, but also let's make sure the bathroom isn't a storage room. Let's make sure there's enough aisle clearance for a wheelchair to get through. Let's make sure that we're not blaring loud music or having strong scents in a business so that it's not overstimulating. Let's make sure that we're using plain language when we market, when we put together signage. Let's make sure we have clear signage. So again, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is accessibility is hard to reach, when really I think most of it is at our fingertips and just involves some time and intentionality.
Thank you very much, Eli. And my next question is for Joshua. Very often we hear about there's like you could follow the letter of the law, but not the spirit. And here this question is about what is the legal baseline under the ADA, and how does it differ from creating an actual welcoming space for people with disabilities?
Okay, so I am a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer, so anything I say is not legal advice. Gotta say that right out of the gate. A colleague of mine once said that the ADA is literally the worst you can do and still be compliant. But I do want to say something about the ADA that I think, as an attorney, strikes me as remarkable. It is the only law that I have ever come across that uses the language of what's called good faith. Good faith is the concept that you get credit for trying. So while a lot of folks are afraid of screwing it up, the law is literally written to encourage you to try, to get over that idea of, oh no, I'm going to fail and I'm going to get sued. No, you can't help from getting sued. I'm a lawyer, I get that. And by the way, I'm not a plaintiff's lawyer, I'm not a defense lawyer. When I practiced, I was a defense lawyer, I defended management, but I don't practice anymore. But it is the only law that I have come across that actually rewards you for trying. And so, as a CASP, I've also met probably a couple hundred small business owners throughout the city of San Francisco, thanks to the Accessible Business Entrance Program, because I was out there on the streets checking out all your doors. And I cannot tell you how many conversations I had with small business owners who are afraid. And when I communicated this with them, it shifts something. It shifts something like, oh, wait a minute, this says actually, what you actually should be doing is trying, giving it your best shot. So I don't know, Andre, if that answers your question, but that's what I'm going to say.
Oh, thank you very much. My next question is for Kiran. How can businesses engage the disability community in their planning and decision-making processes?
That's a great question. My simplest answer to that is ask the disability community.
Yes.
There's been a long-standing principle in the disability community. Nothing for us without us. And so, if you're there are a number of organizations. I'm blind, so I'm kind of more leaning towards those organizations, like the Lighthouse, which is across the street from here, Lighthouse for the Blind, Lighthouse San Francisco. They do offer advice for businesses who are looking for how to make their businesses accessible. But we as customers with disabilities would actually like to help. There have been instances where I approached a business and said, your business, I have these accessibility challenges with your business, and help them resolve those. And so I think asking for help and asking if you do have customers who you think would benefit from it, I think that's the best way to do it, is to ask people with disabilities their opinion, their feedback, and act on it. And again, I think the disability business, Peter might have some more contacts on who can help, especially in the San Francisco area. But I'd say just ask for help. And most of us, people with disabilities, would like to actually help.
Thank you very much, Karan. I'm now going to swing back to Michael here. What do businesses often overlook in terms of accessibility in their customer service practices?
They usually overlook the traditional prejudice that we mostly have in our society. What do I mean by that? Disability does not mean a lack of ability. That is unfortunately what most people think. And when I talk to my diversity friends, they say, well, disability certainly does mean that because it starts with dis. Well, so does disciple, so does discern, so does discrete. And I've never heard of any concept of a lack of crete, or disciple, or cern. The reality is disability is something that every person on the planet has. How do I know? I was in a hotel 2 years ago when the lights went out at 3 in the afternoon because of a power failure. People on the first floor, right in front of windows, started screaming, looking for smartphones because they didn't have the light that they expected. They don't recognize that their disability is light dependence. Thomas Edison invented the electric light bulb 147 years ago, but the reality is that that light bulb was just, as we would say it with the Americans with Disabilities Act today, a reasonable accommodation for light-dependent people who can't function in the dark. But disability is something that every person on the planet has. And we've got to start to recognize that the fact is that everyone has abilities and everyone has challenges, and we shouldn't leave anyone out just because they're different than we are or they do things in a different way. The reality is we provide reasonable accommodations for everybody, for all you light-dependent people out there, or as sometimes we would say, you sighted bigots. The reality is we have windows so that you can look out and see what's going on outside. You have touchscreen coffee machines. You have electric lights so that you can get around in your buildings. You have so many things that are reasonable accommodations for one type of individual. Why is it that we limit ourselves to only dealing with that rather than recognizing the fact that other kinds of accommodations to make the world and individual businesses more inclusive might in fact help everyone? Apple was the first company that really took a major step in this regard when it made all of its iProducts or all of its products accessible. They built in screen reading software right from the outset so that every person who buys an iPhone, an iPad, a Mac, now Amazon is doing the same thing and other companies are, but Apple started it. You can make that device, no matter who you are, an accessible device for all. The reality is we need to start recognizing that disability is not a lack of ability and get rid of that fear.
Oh, thank you very much. My next question is for Joshua here. Now, if you had to give a new business owner a starter kit, yes, for accessibility, what would be the top 3 action items be? What would they be?
Andre, I think you jumped ahead to a question that I hadn't written my notes out for, but first of all, I just want to say, Michael, thank you for what you just said, and I'm going to use that in my trainings going forward and the webinars, and that's awesome. I also want to, kind of building on what Michael said, there's a concept, we're talking a lot about accessibility for people with disabilities, but there is also a concept that accessibility benefits exponentially more people. So many years ago, Microsoft put out this sort of chart that exemplifies what I'm talking about. And basically, it's this idea that there are permanent disabilities, then there are temporary disabilities, and then there are situational, let's say, impairments, okay? So an example of a permanent disability might be somebody who uses a mobility device. An example of a temporary disability might be somebody who is on crutches or some type of little scooter temporarily while they heal, all right? But they're, again, requiring the same level of access to get into your business. Situational might be somebody who is carrying a package and they've only got one arm to operate the door or to navigate around your space. And so even if you just think of it in those terms, you start to see how having an accessible place of business will benefit exponentially more customers. It's also a statement of values around, making sure that everyone feels welcome in your space. So I just want to put that out there. Top 3, so that was, I think, the last question. Andre, you're putting me off my game here. But I would say the ADA actually provides a really great framework for that. And it's really simple. How do your customers access and navigate your space? How do they get in the door? How do they have access to your goods and services? And then if there's anything else, if you're a restaurant and you have to have a restroom or a cafe or something like that, then that's sort of the third level. And so the ADA actually prioritizes accessibility in that order. So follow that. Follow that, because then you're doing 2 things. You are not only ensuring that your customers can get in, get to your stuff, and feel comfortable, but you're also literally following the law. So I would say that's my top 3.
Great, thank you very much. My next question is for Eli here. What strategies have you seen work well in brick-and-mortar environments to create inclusive, sensory-friendly, or otherwise accessible experiences?
Yeah, another great question, and I like that you're mixing it up because it does make us think a little harder. So, when we say sensory friendly, and I touched on a little of this in my previous comments, really creating spaces that are welcoming, easy to navigate, low stimulus in terms of sense, lights, complexity. And, if you are running a nightclub or, a business that just by nature has strong stimulus, what is a quiet space? What is a family room? What is a carve-out that can be designed into that space to accommodate low sensory, disabilities? And an example that I just want to call out is our airport, San Francisco International, has a sensory space in the terminal, and it really speaks to, especially, during COVID, post-COVID, during this complex world that we have to navigate, having calming spaces benefits everyone. It benefits individuals with neurodiversity. It benefits families of young children. It benefits older adults and those of us that are middle-aged with disabilities. It creates a welcoming environment. The last piece that I want to say on this in terms of creating sensory friendly is also just ask if you see someone struggling, if you see a family struggling, if they look uncomfortable. It's less assumption and more asking questions. How can I support you? Is there anything I can do to make this a better experience for you in my store? I think it kind of comes back often to good customer service as a piece of accessibility, and that certainly applies to sensory disability as well.
Thank you very much. My next question is for Kiran here. What's your message to business owners who are overwhelmed or afraid of getting it wrong?
We did talk about this a little bit earlier, I think, but think about your customers. I would say when there is somebody with a disability walks into your business, like you want their business. You want them as a customer. As Eli mentioned here, like if you're not sure, if you're worried about getting it wrong, just ask them, how can I help you? It's that simple. It's just customer service. I think I did talk about a couple of things that you could do. Like if you have, this is where my expertise is, digital platforms, etc. So if you are putting up a online store, for example, you may want to look at what are the accessibility features that platform supports, because you want to pick a platform that already takes away that complexity away from you of creating. You're a small business. You have a million other things to worry about. Creating an accessible e-commerce experience is probably not your expertise. And so pick a platform that actually already does that. But think about, would you turn away a business from a customer who doesn't have a disability? So think about it from a business perspective. You will encounter a customer with a disability eventually, because with aging population, there's probably going to be more people who have some form of a disability, both visible and invisible. And so I think asking, and this is, again, good customer service, like, how can I be of help? And understanding local regulations, like, I am a guide dog user. There are always, even in places like Berkeley, where I have to explain what my rights are under the ADA for admitting service animals. So, try to understand some of the local legislation laws around disability access. But again, the main thing is good customer service. Like, how can I help you? Is always a good question to ask.
Thank you very much. Our next question is for Michael here. Are there specific tools or approaches that help prioritize improvements when budgets are tight? Which are the top things should they get to first?
Let's start with approaches. The cheapest access, the cheapest way to make accessibility part of your business is to do it right from the outset. Do it as part of what you do to start the business. My wife of 40 years, until she passed in November of 2022, was in a wheelchair her whole life. We built 2 houses during that time, among other places where we lived. One house cost us an extra $500 to make accessible because it was a manufactured home and we had to modify plans and get the government to approve it. That cost $500. The other one was in New Jersey, and it was in an area where they had 2-story homes. So unlike most people, we had to install an elevator. That cost an additional $15,000. If we had had to buy a house rather than building a house in any of those situations, and we did have to buy homes and modify them later, so I'm speaking from experience with this as well, it would have cost $100,000 to $150,000 or more to make the home accessible. And it's the same with businesses and whatever you do. If you have a website, make it accessible from the outset. Demand that your web provider make the website accessible. If they don't know how to do that and they can't do that, don't use them. Joshua over here can tell you what will happen if you don't do it right. The bottom line is that there are products. I work with a company called SFDBA that for, depending on the size and complexity of your website, as low as $500 a year can make it mostly accessible, and there might be things that you have to do in addition, but the reality is it can be done, or it can be more expensive. There are lots of tools, but it all goes back to the best way to do it is from the outset. If you do it right from the start, then you will have to pay a whole lot less than you will later on in whatever you do.
Thank you very much. My next question is for Joshua here. Can you give examples of small businesses doing accessibility well beyond compliance? And what stood out? So businesses that go beyond the bare minimum.
Yeah. Yes. Well, kind of. So small business, I know I'm speaking to small business owners. I'm going to speak for a minute, though, about a global business that I just recently finished a project with. But the concepts of which apply, I think, to all of you. So I recently finished a 4-year project with Starbucks. And what we were doing was developing national standards for accessibility, compliance, and beyond. And what we did was we created effectively a sort of a tiered system, right? So here's the baseline. That's tier 1. Here's slightly better than that. That's tier 2. And here's even better than that, and that's tier 3. And then what we did is they sent me all around the country to various Starbucks stores. I cannot tell you how many Starbucks bathrooms I've been in. It's a lot. Sorry. I'm one of. If you ever want to know, if you don't know anyone who has photos of Starbucks bathrooms on their phone, that's me. Anyway, I deleted most of them. So, but what we did with that, so we kind of pressure tested those guidelines and to see how that worked nationwide. And they actually built a store to those specifications in Washington, D.C., which is pretty cool. You can go visit it if you want, and it's probably the most accessible coffee shop you'll ever visit. But what we did with those guidelines is then we took those out and formed a coalition of large retailers. So now we have a coalition that's Starbucks, Walmart, CVS, and they're all looking at these guidelines and figuring out how to apply these in their own retail spaces. So the question was, the question had to do with beyond compliance. And so what I would say is, and it's kind of a shame Katie left because I was going to say to her directly, I'd be happy to work with her and Eli if that is something that you all would be interested in at a city level, but also forming a coalition amongst all of you small business owners in a similar, you don't have to be, Walmart and Starbucks to do this. It can be simply a coalition of San Francisco small business owners who give themselves that kind of, like, here are our goals. Let's see if we can hit these goals. So I think that, to me, is a great business model for how to really integrate accessibility and become a model of best practices.
You have something to say there, Michael?
I just said Peter can help with that.
Thank you. My next question is for Eli. From your perspective at the Office on Disability and Accessibility, what city programs, grants, or tax credits are available to help fund accessibility upgrades?
Yeah, great question, and this was the hardest question on my list, so I wrote a lot of notes for this. So there's a few different programs. So through the City of San Francisco and the Office of Small Business, there's the Accessible Barrier Removal Grant, which provides up to $10,000 for accessibility improvements. On the federal and state level, there's the Work Opportunity Tax Credit, which is a federal tax credit available to employers who hire individuals from targeted underserved communities, including people with disabilities. The credit is up to $2,400 per eligible employee. There's the Disabled Access Credit, which is another federal tax credit that provides up to $5,000 for small businesses that incur expenditures for the purpose of providing access to people with disabilities. There's also the Architectural Barrier Removal Tax Deduction, which is for businesses that can claim a deduction of up to $15,000 a year for expenses incurred to remove architectural and transportation barriers. There's a few more. I'm not going to read all the details, but there's the Employability Business Credit through the California Department of Rehabilitation, as well as the on-the-job training reimbursement, and this is for employers that may be eligible for on-the-job training reimbursement, which is up to 50% of a new employee's wage. I will say, in addition, we have two great resources, the Department of Rehabilitation, as well as our local Golden Gate Regional Center. Both focus on finding people with disabilities jobs and have a variety of training, incentives, and support programs to place people with disabilities in meaningful jobs. And I think just leveraging not just the tax credits, but the programs we have in the city, in the state, certainly partnering as well with our local nonprofits like SDBA is a key to kind of this broader picture of leveraging the incentives that are out there, whether they're financial incentives or in-kind support to create both accessible workplaces, but also to hire people with disabilities.
Thank you very much, Eli. My next question is for Michael here. It's along the same line here. How can small businesses use customer feedback to guide cost-effective accessibility upgrades?
I think the first part of that answer has to be they need to solicit it. They need to be open to it as well. Customer feedback is an extremely important part of any business, and if you don't listen to your customers, you won't be in business very long. But there are also sources to get customer feedback from other places that have already solicited it. For example, the Nielsen company, you know, the rating company that tells us what TV shows they think are good and all that stuff. Well, anyway, the Nielsen company in 2016 did a survey of companies that, among other things, produced a result that said that companies that make themselves accessible have a 35% greater brand loyalty from persons with disabilities. And this goes back to some of the comments that others have made already in this panel. The reality is that, as someone told me once when we were talking about websites, oftentimes we have to muddle through websites just to be able to access them. They're not very usable. Sometimes we can do things with them ourselves. Sometimes we have to use some other products, like a product called IRA that was released in 2015. I can't take the time to go into it now, but the bottom line is that there are ways to do it. But what I'm getting at is that if companies take the time to look at what they have available and recognize that if they make themselves, make their websites, make their environments inclusive, we as people who have to use those services are more likely by far, as Nielsen pointed out, to stick with those websites and stay loyal to them, and stick with those companies and stay loyal to them because they took the time to make themselves inclusive for us, which means we can go to them, we can buy our products from them, we can use their services, whereas with other companies, we don't get that option. So companies, if they solicit feedback, if they ask people with disabilities who maybe they encounter who want to come into their shop and can't because the door isn't wide enough, or who don't get access to somebody to help them find items on shelves, if they ask what can be done to address those issues and then take that feedback to heart, which oftentimes is not necessarily expensive, they will gain much more loyal customers by definition.
Thank you very much, Michael. And my next question is for Josh right here. Along the same line is, what low-cost physical changes can make a huge difference in accessibility?
What am I... You know what, actually, Eli, I realize I didn't follow your lead on the physical description. So for anyone who's wondering, I am a relatively short white dude. I like to tell the kids I present to sometimes that all the hair fell off the top of my head and slid onto the bottom of my face. I have a mustache and a beard, and I'm wearing a light blue sweater and kind of olive-colored pants. Okay, thank you for doing that. I'm sorry, I forgot. Okay, low cost. Thanks, Michael. One of my favorite accessible business entrance evaluations, I was looking at a Chinese restaurant out in maybe the Excelsior or something. It's kind of a blur how many I did. Long story short, the door just sort of opened in a direction that minimized maneuvering clearance. Okay, and so the guy who runs this restaurant says, what can I do? What can I do? And I said, well, I mean, theoretically, all you really need to do is change the direction that this door swings. And I said, and once you do that, I'm happy to come back out and finish up this checklist for you. And he said, no, wait. And he runs to the back of his restaurant. He comes back out with a drill and just did it. It cost him nothing but 5 minutes. I was so impressed with that. I mean, I don't know if that's because he didn't want to see me again. But, that's what I really love about small business owners is that you're scrappy, you're resourceful, you're determined, you're entrepreneurs. You are problem solvers. And this was, I think, a really great example of that. So low cost, I think, I had a little list here. Oh, if you are a restaurant or cafe, have accessible table. And if you don't know what that is, there are easy ways to find that out. And I'm sure Eli or myself or Peter would be glad to talk to you about that. A lot of you may or may not have an accessible counter. I realize that sometimes that can feel expensive. I don't know that it has to be that expensive. It really could be, a temporary, a card table even, something that is at an accessible height, and that is actually used as a counter, not as a place to put a bunch of other stuff that then makes it inaccessible. And then another really, really easy one is having a variety of items on a variety of shelving heights, right? So instead of having everything, product A all on this shelf, product B all on this shelf, product C all on the top shelf, mix it up. Have a little bit of everything on each shelf, right? So then you are accounting for all people of different heights, people who may be reaching things from a seated position, maybe somebody who is leaning on a mobility device that can only reach at a certain height. And so what I've just described, really is, in most sense, costs nothing at all.
Thank you very much, Joshua.
Can I just add one more? Sorry.
Sure,
Just
please.
large print, like large print menus, large print signage. It's so easy to do. As we talked about earlier, we're all aging with and into disability. Just doing things in large print format is so easy and straightforward.
If I could
Thank
if I could add one more thing also, kiosks. We're finding more and more businesses are putting in kiosks so that you can order, you can manipulate things when you go into a store, and you go up into a kiosk, you enter what you want, you go from there. A lot of those kiosks are not accessible, but you know what? If you are putting in something like that and you have somebody developing your app for it, it is really simple and extremely, if at all, any cost, no cost or low cost, to add in as part of the development, making that kiosk accessible, because they're usually using Android devices, but they're using devices that can easily be made to talk without any additional hardware upgrades.
Thank you very much. I know if the panelists feel a need to jump in with another idea or inspiration you have, please feel free to do so. Our next section is regarding training and long-term value. My first question goes to Michael here. Let's see. Which accessibility innovations, whether tech, design, or process-based, should small businesses be watching?
Well, definitely watching a lot of things related to tech. We keep hearing about this thing called AI, but AI is helping to do a lot of things. I mentioned IRA earlier, which is a method that anyone can use. When I go into a store, for example, I can call an IRA agent who is trained to describe, and that agent can help me find things on shelves. Businesses can create what's called an IRA access site by working with IRA to actually make it possible for anyone who uses that product, and it's not just blind people anymore, but can use that product to operate in their stores. It is something that any business can do, and small businesses can certainly take advantage of that and are a lot more flexible at taking advantage of that than certainly larger businesses are. I mentioned Accessibility earlier, which is a way to deal with website access. And the technologies that Accessibility has developed and other companies are working on to make sure that websites are inclusive are something to watch. The whole art of website design is something that small businesses rely on to make their information available. They should make it available to all, and it's not that difficult to do. Processes, listen and look at language. For example, people often talk to me and call me visually impaired. Ain't true. I am not visually different, and I'm not impaired. Visually, I'm not different because I didn't know that you suddenly change your looks if you go blind. It doesn't work that way. And I'm not impaired. Those are things that the so-called professionals in the field created a long time ago. Blind or low vision is a lot more acceptable, and is much more relevant than comparing me to somebody who has more eyesight than I do, since I claim that I have a whole lot more light independence than they do, and I'll stake my ability to function just as much as theirs any day.
Thank you very much. My next question goes to Joshua here. What training or policies have you seen that turn accessibility from a one-time fix into a sustainable business practice?
Yeah, well, I mentioned the accessibility guidelines that we developed with Starbucks and that are now part of this larger retail coalition. And one of the things that we were really clear about when creating those is that this is not a stagnant document. It's a living and evolving document. And anyone who has started a small business, I myself am a small business owner, you know that you start off somewhere, but that's rarely where you end up. Right? You start off with an idea about what you're going to do, what you're going to sell, what you're going to make, what services you're going to provide, and then you evolve, you adjust, you listen to your customers, you see where the market needs are, and you evolve. And the same, I think, is true with accessibility. So what I would recommend is start somewhere, start where you are. Take a look around. How are you doing? How are you doing on accessibility in your physical space, in your digital space? And then check yourself, whether that's quarterly, whether that's halfway through the year, whether that's annually, in the same way that you would look at your own products and services. Where do adjustments need to be made? So I think starting with a basic kind of checklist for yourself, where are you at right now, and then measuring your success on accessibility in the same way that you measure your success as a business.
Thank you very much. My next question is for Eli. How can small businesses track or evaluate the impact of their accessibility efforts over time?
Yeah, and I want to recognize that we're talking about small businesses and not large businesses with complex data tracking systems. But, it could be as simple as just following up with a customer who identifies as a person with a disability and asking how their experience was. And if anything could be, what worked well, what could be improved upon. Just really informal conversation. It could be, if you have some sort of software and customer experience surveys, weaving in questions around accessibility into those surveys or into a survey monkey, into follow-up emails. It could be having a, event or a space at your business welcoming the disability community in, and just kind of coming with like an open hand, open door approach of, I want to learn how to make my business more accessible. I'd love to just hear what your thoughts are. And, I think in all of those examples, again, tying back to this customer service piece that we've all touched on, it's starting from the framework of delivering good customer service from a space of authenticity. And I will speak for myself and my family as, all with disabilities. When it's approached from that place of authenticity, it's often met in response with authenticity. And so it's building that trust, that relationship, that, we talked about brand loyalty in your follow-up, in your feedback, in your survey, or in the questions that you ask.
Could I add something? Very quickly, there are also a lot of consumer organizations out there, the National Federation of the Blind, for example, the American Council of the Blind, the Paralyzed Veterans Association, independent living centers that are across the country. Seek some of those organizations out. People want to find organizations that welcome them, and the more you solicit in the way of input and then put into practice, the better it is. There are a lot of ways to get that information. Don't hesitate to use them all.
Thank you. My next question is for either Joshua or Michael or both. What are some of the most persistent myths or fears business owners have about accessibility, and how can we debunk them?
I'm glad you said I start, Michael, because you're a hard act to follow. I get a lot of questions. I mean, I already talked about, good faith. I already talked about that, so I won't cover that again. But I get a lot of questions about etiquette. And, what's the right way to interact with somebody with a disability? And I think I respect the question. There's a lot of training out there. I think one of the best trainings I found is the United Spinal Association has a fantastic training that they put out every 4 years or so, and I think they just updated it. So really recommend that if you want to really drill down into the details. But really the answer is, well, how would you talk to anyone? Don't make it weird. Right? When somebody says, what's the right way to talk to somebody in a wheelchair? Oh my God. Have you been to a restaurant? Have you been seated and talking to somebody in a standing position? Okay, well. And if you're talking for a long period of time, you sit down and join them, whatever. Just don't make it weird. Or how do I talk to somebody who's, deaf or hard of hearing? Well, have you ever had to communicate with a friend in a really loud environment? How'd you do it? You probably texted them. You probably opened your phone, opened your little notepad, and typed something on there and showed it to them. So I think, I don't even remember what the question was at this point, but I got talking about etiquette, and really my advice is, go ahead. There's plenty of resources online. I really recommend the United Spinal Association's training, your guide on that. And if you don't have the time for that, or if it comes up, something sneaks up on you, just remember, don't make it weird. How would I talk to anybody in any other situation? How would I communicate?
Years ago, my wife and I went to a restaurant, and it was for breakfast on a Saturday morning. I remember it well. We walked in, and we stood in front of the counter. There was a hostess behind the counter, and we stood there for about a minute, and then Karen said to me, she keeps looking back and forth between us. She doesn't know what to say or how to talk to us. So I said, oh, I wonder if she thinks and is wondering whether we want to sit down and have breakfast. Maybe if she asked us, we would just tell her we want to have breakfast. Well, that broke the ice. She did, and actually we had a lot of fun talking with her throughout breakfast. She came over. But it is, Joshua said, it's really not magical. We're not different. I went to, when we lived here in Novato years ago, I went to, with my wife, a store in Emeryville. It was an IKEA store. And while we were at the store, this young man came up and he said, I'm sorry. And Karen said, he's talking to you. And I said, well, you're sorry about what? Well, I'm sorry because you can't see. I said, well, I'm sorry that you can, but and then his mother grabbed him away. But the reality is that is the kind of thing that we face. For years, the Gallup polling organization did surveys that talked about people's fears. I'm sure they still do it. But in the 70s and 80s, one of the top 5 fears wasn't even disabilities. It was just being blind. It doesn't matter whether it's blindness or something else. The reality is we are taught to fear this whole concept of a disability because, it could happen to us. Maybe it'd be a blessing if it happened to you, but the reality is that we shouldn't fear it. And that's the thing that we face the most often. Whether it's visible or not, we face the fear of these people. I've asked a lot of diversity people, as I mentioned earlier, about disabilities, and they talk about the fact that it's the lack of ability and all that. But they don't, when they're talking in their own environments about the things that they represent, they don't mention disabilities. Why? Because it's fear. And that's the problem. And they're not getting over it nearly fast enough.
Thank you very much, Michael. We're now going to closing reflections. Reflections. Yeah, closing reflections for all those who would like to answer. This is for the panelists. In one sentence, how does making your business more accessible directly contribute to growth and resilience? Anyone wants to
It
take
brings
this
in
on?
more customers.
It builds customer loyalty.
Universal design benefits everyone.
Has anyone heard about curb cuts?
Well, thank you very much. I think that wraps it up here. We're just finishing just on time. I want you all to give a big hand to our panelists here.